that feeling when mental health pops up everywhere, but it's like trying to grab smoke?
Hmm.
Headlines scream about stress and anxiety, and you're left wondering, okay, what's the real bottom line here? How do I actually get a handle on what matters without, needing a PhD?
It's interesting you say that. We often see the focus shift immediately
Hmm.
to when things go wrong, mental illness,
Right.
rather than grasping the bigger picture of what it means to be mentally well.
Exactly. So, for this deep dive, we've got this source exploring the spectrum of mental health. Think of it as our guide to cutting through some of that confusion. We're not just talking about the really low points. We're looking at the whole range, really. Everything from those just off days to more significant struggles. Our goal is to give you a really solid understanding.
And that full spectrum idea is so important, isn't it? It reminds us that our mental well-being isn't static. It shifts. We all find ourselves somewhere along that range at different times.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do today. Get a clear handle on what mental health is, see the different ways it shows up in life, and maybe uncover some of the key things that influence it. No super complicated jargon, just hopefully some real insights, maybe some aha moments for you. And to help us unpack all this, we have our expert here, ready to distill what's essential.
Well, it really starts with a fundamental question, doesn't it?
Right.
What does it actually mean to be mentally healthy? Because it's definitely more than just not having a diagnosis.
Right. The material makes that really clear. Mental health isn't just, the absence of illness. It's something much more positive, our emotional, our psychological, and our social well-being. It's really about thriving.
Yes, and there's strong emphasis on balance and resilience too. Resilience being sort of our ability to bounce back when life throws things at us without getting completely derailed.
Yeah, it mentions being able to navigate those challenges, build good connections with people, and actually, reach our potential. Living a full life, basically.
That's a great way to put it. It's like physical health, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just because you're not, say, down with the flu doesn't mean you're ready to run a marathon.
Good analogy.
Yeah. So not having a diagnosed mental illness doesn't automatically mean you have like peak mental fitness.
Okay, so it's a spectrum, like a dial maybe, not just an on-off switch. Can you help us visualize that? What does that look like day to day?
Absolutely. So on one end, you've got those everyday moments we all have, feeling a bit stressed before a big presentation, maybe a little anxious meeting new people, or, sad when something doesn't go our way.
Yeah, totally relatable stuff, just being human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Normal human emotions, natural responses. Then, further along that spectrum, you have conditions that we call mental disorders, things like major depression, various anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And these conditions can significantly impact someone's ability to function, to work, to maintain relationships, to live the life they want.
And it's so important, the source really stresses this, that this spectrum touches everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, mental health is universal.
That's spot on. Recognizing that shared experience is, I think, a huge step towards understanding and supporting each other and ourselves.
The material also brings up something really crucial. Our mental health isn't just floating around in our heads, separate from everything else.
No, not at all. It's fascinating how deeply it's woven into, well, everything. It directly influences our relationships, how we connect, how we
The
communicate.
strength of our support system.
Precisely. And our physical health, too.
Right, that connection isn't always the first thing people think about.
But it's profound. Think about how chronic stress can, over time, genuinely affect our bodies physically. And it works the other way, too, right? If you're feeling physically unwell, that can easily bring down your mood or increase anxiety.
That makes total sense. If you feel rubbish physically, it's hard to feel great mentally. The source also points out that external factors matter a lot, like our life situation, our connections, our physical health. They can all contribute to, or sometimes worsen, mental health challenges.
Yeah, it really highlights that our well-being is layered. It's not just about fixing symptoms when they pop up, it's also about building a life and an environment that actually supports good mental health from the start.
And it puts it nicely. Taking care of our mental health is like having a protective shield that helps us experience joy and fulfillment. I quite like that image.
It does capture that proactive element, doesn't it? Building that inner strength so we can navigate the tough times better and really appreciate the good ones more fully.
No, a term that came up was mental health literacy. Sounds important, maybe a little academic. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Basically, mental health literacy is just our ability to understand and use information to look after our own mental health and maybe support others too. Think of it like being knowledgeable and feeling capable when it comes to our psychological well-being.
So, being informed. What are the key bits that make someone mentally health literate, according to the source?
Well, it outlines a few key things. First, being able to recognize different mental health conditions or just when someone might be struggling. Noticing perhaps that a friend's persistent low mood might be more than just a bad week.
Right, telling the difference between a normal reaction and something needing more attention.
Exactly. Second, understanding potential risk factors or causes. Knowing that, say, past trauma or family history can play a role.
Okay,
Third, knowing about things we can do ourselves, self-help strategies.
like maybe exercise or mindfulness, things like that.
Precisely. Fourth, knowing when and where to get professional help if it's needed. Being aware of the different types of support out there.
That's huge, knowing it's okay to ask for help and where to actually go.
Absolutely. The fifth part is about attitudes. Having attitudes that encourage recognizing problems and supporting people, not judging them. This links directly to reducing stigma, which I know we'll talk more about.
Yeah.
And finally, just knowing how and where to find reliable information. Not just Dr. Google, you know?
So it's not just knowing definitions, it's about being able to use that knowledge. That sounds really empowering, actually.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, shifting slightly, when someone does seek professional help, diagnosis often comes into play. How does that work with mental health?
The material explains it involves carefully looking at signs and symptoms, but also really digging into the person's history. What are their main worries? What have they experienced before? What's going on in their life now? Sounds pretty thorough.
It is, and it should be. Professionals use various tools. Detailed conversations, obviously, but maybe also psychological questionnaires, physical exams sometimes to rule out other causes.
Like a thyroid issue or something.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And neurological exams, careful observation of behavior too.
So, looking at the whole person, the source says diagnosis is just as important here as in, say, cardiology. Why is that?
Because it helps to categorize the experience, identify the key symptoms, and crucially, it creates a framework for figuring out the best treatment plan.
Okay.
So if someone gets a diagnosis for a specific anxiety disorder, for example, it might point towards therapies or medications known to be effective for that condition.
And to help categorize, there are these classification systems, right? ICD and DSM.
Yes, exactly. These systems try to group individuals with similar symptom patterns. The aim is more consistent treatment approaches and a better understanding of potential outcomes. They act as a kind of shared language for professionals.
It mentions the ICD, International Statistical Classification of Diseases from the WHO. That's used a lot in Europe.
That's right. The TENS version came out way back in 1992. It's widely used for tracking health trends, billing, that sort of thing. The source notes its language is quite broad, maybe to make it usable across different cultures.
And the other big one is the DSM Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders from the American Psychiatric Association, more common in the U.S.
Yes, the DSM has had several updates. DSM-5 in 2013 is the latest mentioned. A key difference is the DSM provides very specific criteria for each diagnosis, detailed symptom lists. It's become the standard in the U.S. and is used increasingly worldwide.
Sounds like these systems bring needed structure. But the source also flags that psychiatric diagnosis isn't always straightforward. There are challenges.
That's a really important point. A major challenge is that for many mental illnesses, we don't yet know the exact underlying cause, like we might for, say, a bacterial infection.
Right. There's no simple blood test that says, yep, you have this.
Exactly. And another big one is that the same symptoms can show up in different disorders.
Ah,
And people often have symptoms that fit into multiple categories. The lines aren't always sharp.
that must make it really complex for the clinicians.
It requires a very careful, thoughtful approach considering all the information. The source then gives a quick overview of the main categories: anxiety disorders like panic and social phobia, mood disorders like depression and bipolar,
Also, things starting in childhood, eating disorders, personality disorders.
schizophrenia and related psychotic disorders, substance-related disorders. It's a very wide range of human experiences.
And what about what actually causes these? It's rarely just one thing, is it?
Almost never. The source really emphasizes it's usually a combination, a mix of biological factors, psychological experiences, and environmental influences. It's this complex interplay.
So biologically, it mentions genes, brain structure differences, maybe infections, nutrition, lack of omega-3s is mentioned, specifically exposure to toxins.
Yeah, our basic physical makeup and biology can definitely create vulnerabilities.
And then the psychological side, things like severe trauma, abuse, neglect, losing loved ones early, even relationship breakdowns. Those can leave deep marks.
Absolutely. Those experiences can really shape how we learn to cope, how we regulate emotions, our overall psychological landscape.
And finally, the environment we're in, difficult family life. Big stresses like divorce or bereavement, social pressures, big life changes, violence, substance abuse in the family, even school or work
Right.
stress.
Our surroundings provide the context, and both the supportive and the stressful aspects of that context hugely influence our mental health. It's often that combination, maybe a biological predisposition plus some difficult life events within a stressful environment that leads to a disorder developing.
Now, the source then shifts into something I found really fascinating, the role of exercise and physical activity. It sounds like it goes way beyond just the physical benefits we usually talk about.
Oh, absolutely. The evidence is becoming incredibly strong. Large studies consistently show links between regular physical activity and preventing or delaying the onset of various mental health issues.
Preventing, that's huge.
Yeah, and also using it as a treatment. Conditions like major depression, panic disorder, various phobias show reduced rates in people who exercise regularly.
So it's not just preventative, it can actually help if someone's already struggling.
Exactly. The source digs into how it might work. Biologically, exercise can help normalize levels of something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Okay, BDNF.
Think of it like fertilizer for your brain cells. It helps them grow and connect. Exercise also impacts neurotransmitters like serotonin and Darwin's key mood regulators, and can positively affect our whole stress response system, the HPA axis.
Wow, so it's actually changing brain chemistry in beneficial ways.
It appears so. And psychologically, the benefits are numerous too. Learning new skills, feeling better about your body, social interaction if you exercise with others.
Sense of accomplishment.
Exactly. Mastery. Even just simple distraction from worries can be helpful.
It's hitting on so many levels. Okay, so how does it impact specific conditions? Let's start with anxiety disorders.
The research suggests exercise, both aerobic, like running, and anaerobic, like weightlifting, can significantly reduce both that immediate state anxiety and the more general trait anxiety.
Okay.
Interestingly, some studies found exercise to be pretty much on par with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for anxiety symptoms,
Yeah.
and more effective than quite a few other activities.
That's a powerful comparison. What about panic disorder? That can be so debilitating.
Studies show things like jogging and walking can lead to noticeable drops in panic symptoms. There also seems to be a link. As fitness improves, panic-related anxiety tends to decrease.
Interesting.
One study even found endurance training as effective as a specific medication, clomipramine, though maybe a bit slower to kick in. And get this, exercise has even shown some protective effects against panic attacks intentionally triggered in lab settings.
Wow, so maybe not an instant cure, but a really valuable tool. Depression, that affects so many.
The evidence for exercise in major depression is really quite strong. Reviews combining many studies show a definite positive effect compared to doing nothing. And crucially, it's often found to be as effective as cognitive therapy and antidepressant meds. Particularly, mixed exercise routines involving both cardio and resistance training seem promising.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah, while one study noted it didn't improve cognitive function quite like an SSRI antidepressant did, it did help normalize those important BDNF levels we mentioned.
So it really seems like exercise should be a core part of addressing depression for many people. What about bipolar disorder? That's complex.
It is, and the research is a bit more nuanced here. People with bipolar might fatigue more easily during exercise. However, studies do suggest regular aerobic exercise can still be beneficial, helping reduce stress, depressive symptoms, anxiety.
But maybe with some caution.
Exactly. More research is definitely needed, and there's a potential concern that very intense exercise might risk triggering manic symptoms for some. So it's probably best approached carefully, ideally with professional guidance.
Makes sense. Personalized approach needed. Substance abuse. Can exercise help with recovery?
For nicotine dependence, quitting smoking, the evidence looks pretty good. Exercise seems to be a helpful add-on to things like therapy or nicotine replacement.
How so?
It can reduce cravings, especially those acute ones, and help prevent relapse. The advice seems to be start exercising before you quit, aim for decent intensity, and stick with it for maybe 10 weeks or so. Using exercise as a healthy coping strategy seems key.
Okay. And other substances? Alcohol, drugs?
Here, the evidence is a bit weaker, less clear-cut, partly due to challenges in how the studies were designed, methodological limitations.
Right.
But there is some preliminary evidence suggesting exercise might offer extra benefits for staying abstinent and reducing related depression or anxiety. But yeah, more robust research is needed to be sure.
Got it. And finally, schizophrenia and psychosis, very challenging conditions.
Again, some promising, though maybe early, results. Treadmill training showed some reductions in things like body fat and BMI, but also in positive symptoms like hallucinations and negative symptoms like withdrawal, though not always reaching statistical significance in the studies looked at.
Okay.
Combining aerobic and strength training did show significant improvements in overall mental health and daily functioning. Moderate aerobic exercise reduced symptoms and was linked to increased volume in the hippocampus, part of the brain important for memory and mood.
That's interesting.
Though it's also worth noting one study found yoga was actually more effective than general exercise for reducing symptoms in this group. So movement helps, but the type might matter. More research needed, as always.
Still, this is all really powerful stuff. It's amazing how physical activity can benefit mental well-being across such a wide range. Now, switching gears slightly, the source mentions the epigenetic symphony of meditation. Sounds quite poetic.
It does, doesn't it? This touches on epigenetics, the study of how our behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way our genes work, turning genes on or off, essentially.
So it's not changing our actual DNA sequence, but how it's expressed, like lifestyle influencing biology.
In a nutshell, yes. The source mentions animal studies where early life stress caused lasting epigenetic changes. Now, researchers are looking at how psychological interventions, like therapy or meditation, might do something similar in humans.
How could talking therapy or mindfulness actually change gene expression? That sounds pretty wild.
Well, think about it. Learning new ways of thinking or coping in therapy involves changes in brain activity, right? Strengthening some connections, weakening others.
Synaptic plasticity.
Exactly. And those changes in brain activity could, theoretically, influence epigenetic mechanisms right there in the brain cells involved in learning and memory. These might be subtle changes within the brain itself.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. Brain's adapting.
And interventions that impact our stress response system, how our brain signals stress to the body and how the body responds, could also influence gene regulation through things like DNA methylation, a key epigenetic process.
Ah, so practices like meditation, known to calm the stress response.
Could potentially have these downstream epigenetic effects.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the hypothesis being explored. These changes in methylation could be biomarkers indicating a change in physiological state or maybe even actively contributing to the benefits.
Fascinating.
And the source reminds us there's constant communication between the brain and the body. Stress hormones, immune factors, they influence our thinking and emotions, so interventions affecting those could also work through that pathway. It's complex, still unfolding research, but suggests a deep biological link for psychological practices.
It really drives home how interconnected it all is. Now, the source also tackles a huge barrier: stigma.
Yes, unfortunately, the stigma around mental health issues is still incredibly damaging. It adds so much extra suffering and critically stops people from seeking help.
It mentions the origin of stigma, bodily signs of moral flaws, and Goffman's idea of negative labels. Heavy stuff.
It is. And this negative labeling has real consequences. Public stigma, that's societal stereotypes, discrimination.
You can see that everywhere, right? Media portrayals, casual jokes.
Absolutely. Then there's self-stigma. That's when someone struggling internalizes those negative public beliefs, feels ashamed, loses self-esteem.
That's just heartbreaking, feeling flawed when you're already suffering.
And finally, label avoidance. People actively avoiding help because they fear being slapped with a mentally ill label and facing all the negative consequences.
It's a vicious cycle. Stops people getting the very support they need. Reducing stigma is clearly crucial.
Absolutely essential. Now, finally, the source introduces this idea of mentalizing as a way to understand and maybe even help with mental health issues. What exactly is mentalizing?
Mentalizing, as it's explained, is basically our ability to understand ourselves and others based on our inner mental states. Emotions, desires, beliefs, goals. Recognizing that behavior is driven by what's happening inside someone's mind.
Okay, like empathy and self-awareness combined.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
A capacity to see minds, including our own.
And the source mentions different dimensions, automatic versus controlled, internal versus external focus.
Self versus other, cognitive versus affective. Yeah. 4 dimensions.
And the idea is that mental health problems often involve imbalances across these dimensions.
That seems to be the proposition, that maybe improving our mentalizing ability could be helpful across different kinds of disorders. It's presented as a kind of fundamental human skill.
Interesting. And it links its development back to early childhood, to our first attachments.
Yes, the model suggests that a secure attachment with a primary caregiver lays a vital foundation for developing good mentalizing skills later on.
How does that work?
Well, a secure base allows a child to explore safely, and caregivers who provide that security are often better at mentalizing themselves. They're more attuned to the child's internal world.
Ah, so the parent's ability to understand the child's mind helps the child develop their own ability.
Exactly. When parents are sensitive and reflective about the child's feelings and intentions, they create this reflective environment that helps the child make sense of their own and others' minds and build resilience.
But difficult early experiences could disrupt that.
Precisely. Adversity or maybe biological factors can get in the way. The source also brings in a broader social evolutionary view, highlighting that mentalizing develops within families, communities, cultures. It introduces epistemic trust, basically, knowing who and what information to trust.
And that's linked to attachment and mentalizing.
Apparently so. Being able to trust relevant information from others is crucial for social learning. And people with secure attachment and good mentalizing skills are better at this and also better at regulating their own thoughts and feelings, especially under stress. They can co-regulate with others effectively.
Building resilience together.
Yeah, so summing it up, mentalizing is this core human thing, understanding minds, our own and others. It's vital for navigating our complex social world, for collaboration, for understanding each other. Seems pretty unique to us humans.
It does. It's what allows us to adapt to constantly shifting relationships and social dynamics. A key skill for connection and thriving.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. If you had to pick, 2 key takeaways from this deep dive for our listeners, what would they be?
I think one is really grasping mental health as that spectrum we all move along. It's not just ill or well, it's fluid.
Right.
And second, maybe the sheer power of that mind-body connection, how much our physical health impacts our mental state, and vice versa. They're not separate at all.
Definitely. And for me, I think the potential of something as accessible as exercise is really striking.
Yeah.
How it can impact so many different conditions.
Yeah.
And also this idea of mentalizing. Understanding our own inner world and having the capacity to understand others seems so fundamental to connection and well-being.
It's fascinating how these pieces, the spectrum, mind, body, movement, understanding minds, they all weave together, don't they, to give a much richer picture.
So thinking about that interconnectedness, that mind-body link, maybe a question for you listening is, what's one small thing you could perhaps incorporate into your routine to nurture both your physical and mental well-being?
And perhaps, reflecting on mentalizing, how might understanding that concept shift how you approach your next conversation with someone? Thinking about what might be going on behind their words.
We really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, maybe broader picture of what mental health is all about. That's just a starting point, of course. We encourage you to chew over these ideas, maybe explore anything that particularly resonated with you further.
Absolutely. Ultimately, understanding ourselves and each other is it's an ongoing journey. We hope this has offered some valuable perspectives for yours.
Thank you, viewers, for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your colleagues. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking that subscribe button below so you never miss out on valuable insights. I'm Brian Edmonds, signing off. See you in the next one.